If you had one horse you're riding, you could easily control it, maybe left or right easily. But as we are
Mhm.
coming up with multi agents and multi things, these agents are going to be so powerful. You need to put them in a harness. You need to put them guardrails. We need to
Mhm.
start thinking of putting this harness on these agents. Hi everyone, welcome to our episode on harness engineering. Harness engineering is a discipline of designing infrastructure, feedback loops, control systems, and a lot of things that we need for AI. So, Tina, I'm excited for this episode.
I'm also super excited, but first, I want to ask you, what is your AI concept of the week?
So, I've been working on a couple of projects like all of us, Tina, in our team. And one of the things that we kind of do not talk about is AI runtime layer. So we are building all these agents, and we have a lot of new IOs and other things coming where they speak about agents running 24/7. But agents are not always running. So your Google search is not always running, right? It needs for you to go and make
Mhm.
that notification happen, or you have to put the work in to put the prompt in to get the search. What AI runtime layer is, it runs in the back end with a lot of things in terms of, oh, at this schedule, I want to do something. How do you build those AI runtime layers is becoming very important now, as we really need these agents to work 24/7. What I mean by 24/7 is online by themselves. They are available for you when you need it. So when you make a prompt, these hosted agents that are going to be sleeping or they're not going to be active, they need this runtime layer to be always available to pick up signals from the users. So AI runtime layer is going to be the concept of the week from me, but I'm really hoping there will be a lot more topics coming on that soon.
That is very interesting, and I think that ties in with my AI concept of the week because you mentioned being able to run AI 24 hours a day, and it reminds me of the fact that the thing that's very in these days is called token maxing. So token maxing is my AI concept of the week, and it's the idea that if you if someone automates a process, or let's say they start developing AI from with AI, then of course they'll be using a lot of tokens, and so you assume that because they're using more tokens they're being more productive. And so companies have kind of turned this on its head by saying the people who are using the most tokens are probably the most productive, and then made that a KPI. So they've said, hey, we are looking at who's using the most tokens because we assume that they're using the most AI, so they're probably doing the most. And of course, employees have said, oh, if the target is to do tokens, I'll just do tokens. So in a lot of companies, they're just using AI for trivial things just to be able to use tokens. And like you said, like running an agent for 24 hours a day, even if it's doing nothing, will use tokens and then will lead to token maxing. So it's a bit of a strange concept in that people are just using tokens for tokens' sakes. And a lot of companies have now run out of their AI budget of the year because people are using tokens as much as possible. And another thing that I noticed is I was listening to a podcast this morning with one of the developers of OpenAI. His name is, I need to check, Paul Dopolo. I don't know if you've listened to anything from him, but he gets introduced on stage as a developer that's reached 1 billion tokens. So he's a billion token developer, meaning like he's so good at using tokens. You know, he's using it in the taxi whenever, you know, he's using billions of tokens. And I thought it's token maxing is really this badge of honor that you're using like more tokens than anyone else, which is a ridiculous thing, but that is the era that we're in.
Yeah, I find it funny as well because it's not about writing 100 lines of code or 10,000 lines of code, right? It's writing the code that you need. Even I find
Mhm.
even token maxing is great in maybe 5 months ago, but now it's token
Mhm.
optimization is where we're going. But
Yes,
that's funny that he got
100%.
introduced as 1 billion token user. I don't know how many
Yes.
tokens I used, Tina. We need to check.
Yes, I think we have some internal reports, so we could maybe check it out. But let's get into harness engineering, and maybe I can just start to open the conversation like this. I was speaking at a conference to someone who works at a private bank, and he said something that really like it really struck me, which is that when he puts something in production, he asks himself, is this stable enough to work for another 20 years? Because it's so difficult to get something into production that by, doing it, he knows that they're not going to change it or touch it for 20 years. And that means that he's putting code into production that will live in a world that he cannot predict yet in 20 years, right? Who knows what the world is going to be like in 20 years. And I think that's something that we have in a lot of situations where we're building things for problems that we don't know yet, or that will live in a ecosystem that we cannot predict. And it's like how do we handle that? Like, how do we do that for AI? How do we make sure that when we put something in production, it will be future proof, that in 6 months, in a year, in 5 years, it will still be running? And so, yeah, I don't know, that sets it up for me. What do you think about the
It's a great
um
That's a great question, and in a way, it's a very realistic question, right? Because even when we deployed ERP and others, we tell them that for next 5 years, you don't need to do anything. Next 10 years, our ERP will sustain,
yes,
will provide all the updates. He asked you 20 years. I don't know what happens in 20 hours with Cloud Code or other things. They're
yes, exactly, right, yeah.
Yeah, they're deploying new topic. Even with you and me, we struggle all the time. We come up with this concept of the week because last week it was something, this week it's gonna be a new thing. And that's how we
Exactly.
started this podcast in our AI era to like, in a way for me, this is to look back and see what all the things that changed in AI for us.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so, but let's get into our topic, which is harness engineering. In my view, I don't know about 20 years, Tina, but for last 2 years, we've been looking, and last few episodes as well, we've been talking about AI models with more power, more tools, more things that
Mhm.
we're bringing in. But one thing Anthropic recently published was these managed agents where you containerize all of those things. You put tools in the container, you put all the other things in the container, as well as harness. So, in my view, simply to explain, harness is nothing but, so if you had one horse you're riding, you could easily control it, maybe left or right easily. But as we are
Mhm.
coming up with multi agents and multi things, these agents are going to be so powerful. You need to put them in a harness, you need to put them guardrails. We need to
Mhm.
start thinking of putting this harness on these agents and other things within a company itself. So that is what harness engineering is going to be. And I'm excited to learn from you on what are the things that you've been sharing as well. So let's see what are the things that Anthropic's sharing and what you are building as well.
Yes, Anthropic wrote this article called Manage Agents, and it's sort of the start of harness engineering. And we have to also call out that harness engineering is a 2026 term, right? It's not something that's been around for years. Like, we've been doing those sorts of things, but it as a term is kind of brand new. So I think it's sort of strange to think how fast AI is moving with things like this. And we can link the article below for Anthropic, but we'll put up the picture, which is basically the key is this idea that you have a harness which in the middle, and then connected to it you have things like tools. So for example, MCP servers would be your tools. Then you have also sessions on the left. On the right, you have a sandbox, so where the agent is running. And then you have orchestration, which is orchestrating, like you said, use these multiple horses that are all, have their own will. So it's these four sort of concepts that tie together the harness. And for a long time, we thought just putting them, together next to each other was a good idea, like having the four concepts without the harness. But you need something that keeps them together. And that missing piece is the harness. Um, and I guess the key is that uh, a production agent is not just a model, right? We've called it you've called it naked agents in the past, which I love. So naked agents is not an enterprise software concept. You need something stronger to be the conductor and to do the orchestration. So if you have the harness, it orchestrates these four concepts that make up modern AI design.
Agreed. And to go back to that analogy of the horse, it kind of helps me to
Mm,
understand. And me and Tina, we usually like to visualize different things to see how can we translate
mm,
that foreign concept into a thing for us, audience, as well as ourselves. One thing I really learned was, as an enterprise, you're using agents now. You're not using as an individual anymore. So it's not about your horse. It's basically like you have a big cart, let's say, or your horse carriage. That's your enterprise. It's been driven by these AI agents, right? So all these AI agents need to work stably. They all have to be maintained stably. And like you mentioned, Tina, with the naked agents, our models are not unmanaged anymore. Previously, we had a model that's good for coding. We had a model that's good for maybe visual things. Maybe we had a model that can do PDFs. But now a model is,
Mm.
no one's expecting to have different models. They want one model to do everything. The models are getting so big and so powerful that they are becoming the real multi-model AI agent, AI models now. So when you have those models, you cannot build harness within the model itself. You need to build it outside through agents. And that's where the harness engineering is coming in. And like Tina mentioned, we have all these tools, orchestration, sessions, sandbox, and the runtime layers. When you add all those, how are they all pulling the cart in the same direction? If they all go in different direction, your
Yeah.
enterprise is not going to move forward. Forget moving forward, but it might not even be stable. So the goal is to bring this harness engineering to help you guys with not only managing context, calls, memory, but also recovery of where you want to go with your company.
Yes. And I think we should make this a bit more concrete to discuss each of these things. I just sort of mentioned them when we showed the diagram. So if we look at this picture, we should like let's start with tools. For me, that's the easiest because I work with MCP all the time. So what the harness does with the tools is it decides which tools to call, right? Which when it should retry, when it should not call a tool. So MCP gave us this protocol, but the harness kind of gives us the way to make sure that we're using the protocols correctly. Then the other one that I could call is the orchestration. So the orchestration is really taking whatever outcome we want and breaking that into steps. So coming up with a little bit of a plan, and also knowing kind of when a plan succeeded or when a step succeeded, when it should redo something, and also of course knowing when to pull in a human. So that's orchestration and tools. Do you want to cover sandbox and session?
Yes, thank you, Tina. And tools and orchestration are the most important things. But then, if you think of sandbox, what it means is you have a small tenant, or you create a sandbox with those tools and orchestration. Then you can start testing before you run. It's basically like a playground for your horses or your harness that you want to build. You could create that sandbox with the limited harness of. You can give it an isolated code, maybe you can give it an isolated product or application that you want it to work with within that sandbox, so that harnessing that sandbox will help you to do that. And then harness to sessions is, sessions already have this inbuilt harness which they only remember the same session. But recently we came across this whole thing about LLM memory, which means your LLM should remember all the things that you do, what you need. So when you add all those things, suddenly your session becomes bigger, and it might be able to, as you're working on one project, because of your memory, it might think something else from a different project and come in and insert into the session. So harnessing your session also becomes much more important, and managing those sessions will be very key for you. And currently, where we are with all the agentic engineering and agents that are becoming multi-agents, Tina,
Mm.
if you pull one of these harnesses, suddenly you won't be a production agent. Suddenly, even if you
Mm.
have 10 horses that are working great and one pulls you in the wrong direction, or one agent that has no harnessing, can literally destroy you. And we had so many examples of. Recently, I saw one of the agent that deleted all their Versal database because they didn't put the right harnessing and things in there. So imagine deleting all of your database, all of your code, or all of something. You need to build this harness in such a way that it has, the model is so powerful, it still has that limits are controlled by your harness, not by instructions or other things, because instructions are overridden. But if you build a right harness and the right sandbox, and like Tina mentioned, right tools and orchestration, you are able to succeed in actually taking these agents to production.
Mm. Yes. And what we should also mention is that inside the harness, there's also different subset systems. So, for example, context engineering, like you said, the context window is very important. That's one of the subsets, sub systems. Then tool orchestration, verification loops, big topics that's starting to come up is cost management, and then of course also observability. So you shouldn't see these as sort of separate parts of the pictures. They're actually like how the harness is executing, and doing its job with the connections. Um, and of course, you'll see a huge improvement when you do harnesses, because you're not just doing prompts, and like in the background as we used to do. It's really putting it into a framework that can optimize the way that the agent works.
Also, Tina, we kind of do this internally for ourselves. Me and Tina, we have our own agentic OSS that we built on. Based on our job, we kind of have our harnesses. But there are a couple examples I can bring to the table, Tina, which is OpenAI recently shipped something saying they wrote like this million lines of code where they say AI wrote all the code, but what is the job of the humans in that scenario, right? Even us, we are building a lot of these agents internally and a lot of tools. Tina helped me on how we do certain tools with Clawpilot and others. When she was showing me, she was basically showing the harness she's building to make it work in the confined thing
Mhm.
that we need. When OpenAI released that, they said humans didn't write any of the code, AI agents wrote them. But what humans did was they wrote that harness. That is where the AI written code is useful because they built the harness in such a way that the code is never written outside of those guardrails or things that they needed in order to do that. And Anthropic also is doing the same thing with these managed agents. Basically, they actually made it even easier for everyone who are thinking of harness engineering, which is when you build these managed agents, there is a playbook for you. Like Tina was showing that example earlier, you have all these things working with your harness to get the output that you desire.
It is the future that people will not be writing code, but we will still need strong software engineers that can, make sure that what the agents are building is within the context. And maybe it's also interesting to discuss this in terms of enterprises, because I think that's sort of always its own beast, right? Any thoughts on why this is important for enterprise?
Yes, in my view, we are living this generative world, right? Everything's generative on the
Mhm.
fly. Outputs are very probabilistic. So models will hallucinate. We all know that models have a drift. They pick up a wrong tool, maybe. They forgot what we were doing earlier or what code they have written previously. If you add a new feature, it might break the other feature. So you cannot fix that by
Mhm.
buying a better model or buying something stronger. So you can, in the analogy, if I go back, I'm sorry, I keep bringing this up. You have like five horses, but just because you bought a bigger and stronger horse, it doesn't mean it will fix your problem. Because if
Yeah.
it goes in a wrong direction, everything's gone to waste so far what you have done, and you'll end up in. I don't want to call it a failure, but lessons learned will be much more harder to digest.
Yes, yeah. And I think it brings it back to you need to have a great harness because the horses will get stronger, right? That's something that we've also learned in the last couple of years that every couple of months there is a new model and you want to be able to swap that out and then still make sure that, the guardrails, all of the sort of processes that you've set up still works, but just with the stronger horse. And that's why you need a great harness. And maybe I'll just quickly mention something about the dynamics world. This is kind of what we're trying with Copilot Studio, right? So Copilot Studio has the sessions and has connections to MCP, right? It has the tools, it can do the orchestration, and then you can swap out the model, right? And it doesn't matter because it still has all of these guardrails and these sort of structure that is built around the model that makes it more than just a naked agent.
Agreed. So the finally the takeaway here is like Tina mentioned, we have these tools, sessions, orchestration, and all are working with that harness. And there might be another thing that comes tomorrow. We don't know as soon as we release this episode, but they're all gonna have to work with that harness that you're trying to build as a company. And in my view, the biggest question for anyone in 2026 is about it's more about what capability you add. It's not about like what other tools I want to add, but it's about what harness do I have that will protect any tool that I add to it. If I add something, I want to make sure my
Mm.
harness is strong enough to be able to stop that thing from going in a wrong direction. Please read the Anthropic's article that we'll link down in the show notes for us. But
Mhm.
ask yourself a question amongst all the stack, what is the harness that you're building? What is a harness for you versus your team versus your company? How you're building those agents with the right harness that you need.
Yes. So this was super interesting. Thanks for sharing this week, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Bye.